The samurai are playing weird in the Naruto series, both from an in and out of universe perspective. Obviously Naruto is a story mainly about ninjas, until they were about aliens, but whatever. The thing is, samurai, it makes sense for them to show up in the Naruto series, but the way Kishimoto goes about it is weird and in many ways undercooked. We're going to talk about why in this video, and also we're going to explain the main retcon that happened regarding the samurai in the series. Yes, there was a retcon about the samurai. A retcon most people don't remember, but it's a very interesting one. So, when you think about the samurai in the Naruto series, you're usually going to think about the weird guys that wear that gray metallic suit of armor, the gas masks, helmets covering all their heads. Essentially the guys from the Land of Iron that get introduced in Naruto Shippuden that are completely clad in armor. Those samurai are introduced in chapter 556 of the Naruto series. However, most people don't realize or simply forget that the samurai have been introduced much earlier. More specifically in the Land of Waves arc in chapter 18. Remember those two characters that are just goons for Gato? Well, funnily enough, they have names. It's Zori and Waraji, and their names are actually based off of sandals. Random trivia fact. But those guys are introduced as samurai when they show up. When they're actually introduced, the manga does something that's very rare in the Naruto series. Because the manga introduces them with a text block saying this is Zori and Waraji, and they are samurai working for Gato. Usually the anime actually does the introductions of characters narratively, but these characters were so minor and kind of irrelevant that, yeah, we could just introduce them like this, it's not gonna matter very much. You see that much more often in other manga with a lot of secondary characters. My Hero Academia, for example, there are several characters introduced with these text blocks essentially that give you the name of the character, a main characteristic, and a couple other facts maybe. So the introduction is done very quickly and you'd have to spend page time doing the introduction itself. This is done for these two characters, Zori and Waraji, and the main fact that a text box tells us is that they are samurai and also working for Gato, but in this video it's important that they are samurai. And yeah, I mean, I guess it does make sense for them to be samurai. After all, they're clearly not shinobi and they're wielding katanas. That's like the requirement, right? No, not really, I'm kidding. The thing is that, historically, this rivalry between the ninja faction and the samurai faction didn't even exist. Because they were not opposing factions, they were completely different things. Samurai was a title of nobility akin to a lord or a knight in Europe. Ninja was a profession related to espionage, infiltration, and diplomacy. So, in theory, you could be a samurai and a ninja at the same time. It's essentially an invention that ninjas were like the bad people or the rogues in Japan, and they fought against the samurai who were much more honorable. This is made up. It's cool, but it's made up. And by the way, the samurai are being introduced here in chapter 18. It definitely does not feel like the samurai are the more honorable ones in the Naruto world, at least, because Zori and Waraji do some very heinous things, which is going to be extremely contradicted later on by the introduction of the actual samurai. Now, there's already something pretty damn strange with the introduction of Zori and Waraji here, which is that Kishimoto introduces this completely new faction that he does pretty much nothing with until chapter 556, and when they are reintroduced, they are completely different. This is chapter 18 in the first major arc of the series. Yes, we had gotten a few explanations as to how the Naruto world works with the Kage and the feudal lords and everything, the shinobi system, roughly speaking. Kakashi explained those things in the beginning of the Land of Waves arc. But the world is still very fresh, we don't know much about it, and the introduction of a completely new faction so early on indicates that this faction is going to be at least somewhat relevant throughout the series, and it also indicates that there are several other factions that are not ninjas and that are somewhat relevant for the world. The samurai being one of them, and probably the most iconic beside ninjas when it comes to Japan. Now obviously the Naruto world is not completely based off of Japan, but it's very much inspired by it. And because of the weight the word samurai carries, you would think they would be somewhat important, especially in a story that's about ninjas. But they are not. Actually, they are always depicted as very much inferior to ninjas in the Land of Waves arc. Zori and Waraji are humiliated in their introductions. Zabuza is bedridden, kinda hurt, and Gato's gonna mock him and touch Zabuza and do something to him. Haku doesn't allow Gato to do that and hold his arm. And then the samurai spring to action because they're Gato's bodyguards. They have to protect Gato because Haku's breaking his arm. And as they move forward and motion to unsheath their katanas, Haku is faster than them and unsheathes their katanas for them before they can even see what the hell is going on, and Haku holds the katanas to their neck wrecks. So they're completely humiliated and blitzed by Haku. Which, yeah, I mean, Haku's powerful and fast, but he was pretty relative to Sasuke at the end of the arc. And obviously Haku was a much more important character for you to hype up in the Land of Waves arc than those two minor samurai. Before the introduction of these two guys, and of an entire faction by consequence, they feel pretty damn pathetic, which doesn't bode well for a completely new faction you're trying to introduce if you want to make them relevant, I guess, and yeah, it doesn't happen. Now you may say, well, it's because Haku is just so fast and powerful. It's unfair to say that they got humiliated just because they lost to Haku, but no! That's not the only time Zori and Orochi are completely humiliated in the Land of Waves arc, because towards the end of the arc, when they were commanded to capture Inari's mom, Naruto saves Inari and his mom, and then two Naruto shadow clones one-shot Zori and Orochi with a single kick. Like, the two clones kick them at the same time, and they get knocked out cold by a Naruto shadow clone. And this was a Land of Waves Naruto. He wasn't terribly powerful at this point of the story. Naruto's main ability here was to spam the Shadow Clone Jutsu, which he did against Mizuki, and that worked well in Naruto Chapter 1, but here, they get one-shotted by a single Naruto clone. Like, they don't even fight! They're just humiliated by Naruto, and yeah, it's a cool moment for Naruto, but it's a terrible moment for the samurai overall, and it sets them up as being very much inferior to ninjas. Because if two of them are getting overwhelmed by a Genin's shadow clone by a single kick, that's kind of horrible for them, isn't it? I mean, they may not be the strongest of their faction, but it doesn't really bowl too well, especially when you take a look at things from a more meta perspective and realize, okay, this is the introduction of the Shinobi faction here. It's not great. And it's not as though those two guys were beginners or kids like Naruto was. No, they were adults. But okay, that's the setup, and you can do some very interesting things with it. Maybe Kishimoto did so intentionally. You could set up the samurai as this inferior warrior class to the shinobi, not capable of using chakra, relying solely on their swordsmanship skills, and therefore their services are certainly cheaper than the services of a ninja, and that's why Gato hired them to begin with. That's also why Gato hired Haku and Zabuza, rogue ninjas who are much cheaper, and their villagers are not gonna complain if you don't pay them. That's exactly what Gato tells them when he betrays Zabuza. But the samurai being a completely inferior class to the ninja is definitely not something stereotypical that you would see in a ninja samurai story, but it's an interesting twist. You could certainly do some interesting things here narratively speaking. You could even do some stories about maybe a samurai who tries to become a ninja, trying to leave this life of a samurai, because apparently samurai would work for pretty much everybody that asks. Ninja villages had more reserves, like they wouldn't just give their services to somebody very scummy like Gato, unless it really benefits their interests. I mean, all villages have some dirt, some other than others, but still, this is an interesting setup. And yeah, we see that the samurai here are definitely very scummy, because during Kaisa's death, Zori, the samurai that wears the beanie, is the one who actually kills Kaisa when he was, crucified there. He's the one that deals the finishing blow. And they also go to kidnap Inari's mom, and they're not being very nice about it whatsoever. Yeah, Gato tells them to bring her alive, but they were like, I mean, we have to bring you alive, but we can kill like the little kid. And then Inari's mom is like, yeah, if you do anything to him, I'll bite my tongue and die this way, so you can't have an alive prisoner, which is not what Gato told you to do. Those guys were definitely dark. The other henchmen Gato had access to were also pretty scummy. I mean, we don't see them doing much, but just by their demeanor and what they're saying when they arrive to the Great Naruto Bridge there, it's not great. We also don't know if all of them were samurai or if some of them were just like mercenaries or something like that. Only Zori and Orochi are introduced as samurai, but those other guys could also be samurai. I mean, it's very stereotypical that samurai use the katana every time, but historically speaking, the samurai used all sorts of weapons, so it would make sense for samurai there to be using all sorts of weapons that they impale Zabuza with. And oddly enough, the main weapon of choice for samurai was actually the rifle. Like, they used a lot of gunpowder weapons. Not so much the katana. The katana is just like cooler and got more popular in pop culture and everything. So in this pre-retcon version of the samurai faction, all those guys that showed up to the Great Naruto Bridge after Haku's death could be samurai. Cheaper men to hire that don't have ninjutsu, but they can still fight. and present some danger, I mean, they technically kill Zabuza. Yeah, Zabuza was like armless and he wasn't fighting against them, but they still killed him. But the thing is, samurai are completely changed when they're introduced in the 5 Kage Summit arc. The whole faction is retconned to something different. Now samurai are the warriors of a specific nation in the Naruto world called the Land of Iron. That very cold nation where it's always snowing. They wear this very specific samurai armor with a mask and helmet, and they are actually capable of using chakra. No ninjutsu, but chakra. We've never seen Zori and Waraji using those things, and none of the other Gato mercenaries either. And by the way Kishimoto introduces the samurai in chapter 18 in the beginning of the series, it feels like they are not from a specific nation. It feels like they are a more ubiquitous faction like the ninjas are. Like, try to put yourself in the perspective of somebody that's reading Naruto for the first time and you're on chapter 18 and you just get the samurai introduced to you. The way they are introduced, it definitely feels like there will be several factions of samurai in the Naruto world. And now that the samurai are from a very specific nation in the world, especially because Kishimoto doesn't even elaborate on the samurai like whatsoever. He just kind of says, yeah, those guys are samurai, that's it, deal with this information. But he doesn't explain anything about them, and it feels like this explanation will come later. But then, when it actually comes, which is much, much later, over 400 chapters later, it doesn't make any sense from what you previously established. Well, because it's a retcon. Not only are Zori and Waraji nothing like the samurai we get introduced to in Shippuden, when it comes to their physical characteristics, they also cannot use the abilities the samurai have, and the samurai from the Land of Iron are the servants of peace in the Naruto world. Zori and Waraji were definitely not the servants of peace, with what they've pulled with Kaiza and Inari's mom and everything. They're not peaceful dudes. Now, you can say that they're like rogue samurai from the Land of Iron, which would work in a way, but they would be much inferior to the samurai from the Land of Iron because they can't do what they do. And if they were rogue samurai, they probably would have been introduced as such, because there's a very clear difference between a ninja and a rogue ninja, for example. And if you're introducing a faction by a rogue element, then you have to make sure the audience knows they are rogues and they're not the norm for that specific faction. So no, Kishimoto obviously hadn't come up with a Land of Iron samurai thing by the Land of Waves arc. Otherwise, he would have done things much more differently in that arc, especially regarding those two characters. But alright, I guess you can say they were weak samurai that became rogue samurai, and that's the retroactive explanation. Maybe they weren't honorable enough, they didn't uphold the ideals of peace that the samurai had, and so Zori and Waraji left the Land of Iron, became rogue samurai working for cheap jobs for Gato and other scummy guys like him. That's a decent retroactive explanation, it does work. But even when you explain away this retcon, the samurai themselves are still really freaking weird in the Naruto series. Because yeah, we kind of forgot that the samurai had been introduced in the Land of Waves arc, but now in the 5 Kage Summit, the samurai are gonna play a much more major role. We're going to the country of the samurai. They're gonna have a standard design like the ninjas have the vests for a standard design, for example, and the headbands. They're going to host the 5 Kage Summit, which is a pretty big deal. So if you're introducing this new major faction in the Naruto series, you're signaling to the reader that this faction is going to be pretty damn important, and it's going to have some relevance and weight in the narrative overall. And like, they just don't? It's so strange. It's one of those Kishimoto half-baked concepts that he probably thought was very cool and was like, oh, let me put this into story, I like this. But then he makes it a setup that's never really delivered upon, which is disappointing. And also kind of pointless, because you could be developing other things instead of setting up things that you're never going to pay off. Yes, Naruto the manga was way past its halfway point when the samurai are reintroduced in the Land of Iron, but you still have a decent chunk of the manga that's okay, I guess, there could be development for them there, but there simply isn't. Now, there are some interesting things about the samurai. First, their designs are pretty cool. The standard samurai design, I have nothing to complain about that. That one samurai that we see in the first panel they're introduced that has the fur coat, that one is really cool looking. Mifune and the other ones that don't have the standard armor, I have nothing to complain about them. When it comes to their design, it's fine. And a new faction, that's kind of exciting, isn't it? So obviously you're doing away with the concept that the samurai are just fodder that are not capable of using ninjutsu or maybe just chakra, and now they are a credible threat. So much so that when Inoki is explaining what the samurai are all about, he says that the Land of Iron is a neutral land in the Naruto world, and that the shinobi agreed that they are never going to interfere there. So that definitely holds some weight. If the 5 major nations and the smaller nations as well all agreed that, okay, we're not gonna mess with these guys, we're gonna leave them neutral, that means they have to have some type of different power, or at least ways of defending themselves. And at the beginning of the 5 Kage Summit, that's definitely the feeling you get when you're introduced to the samurai. Because in the chapter following their introduction, 457, Sasuke and Team Taka are debating about ambushing and killing Danzo as he's arriving to the Land of Iron, and they're like, no, we can't do that because this place is crawling with samurai and Karin's afraid of samurai reinforcements. So you're like, oh, okay, if they're dangerous for Sasuke Uchiha with a Mangekyo Sharingan, I guess they're a pretty formidable threat, aren't they? Well, as we're going to see later, not exactly. Because when White Zetsu reveals that Sasuke has infiltrated the 5 Kage Summit building, the samurai go after him, and he just kind of walks to them and says, yeah, I'm really pissed off right now, so I recommend it to go away, and they don't do so, and they attack Sasuke. And this is pretty much the only time we get to see the samurai powers, the way they maul chakra, which, if you ask me, the most uncreative way for you to have samurai having powers in the Naruto series, their powers to, like, enhance their swords with chakra. Sasuke has been doing this ever since the beginning of Naruto Shippuden with lightning, and they just use chakra, which looks less cool. And I mean, yeah, I guess they can kind of shape their weapons into the shape of other types of blades, like axes and things like that, and also launch their chakra blades from a distance, which, I mean, Sasuke just blocks with his lightning sword. But yeah, not terribly creative. And yeah, I guess they're not supposed to be ninjas, they're not supposed to use ninjutsu, so they can't be too creative with their powers because they're inherently not ninjutsu. But like, it definitely gives off the vibes of, oh, okay, these are absolute jobber characters, they're never gonna do anything important, which is true, with the exception of Mifune, maybe. Because yeah, in chapter 460, Sasuke casually kills a platoon of samurai off-screen. We do see him killing them in the anime, which is kinda nice, but in the manga, it's just like, yeah, Sasuke attacks the first guy, they cut away, when they come back, all the samurai are dead on the ground. Sasuke has dealt with them. So much for the formidable threats of samurai reinforcements, right, Karin? Wow! It's a much more intelligent strategy not to ambush Danzo before he gets to the summit, but to wait until he gets into the summit location with 4 other Kage and their bodyguards, because we're trying to avoid samurai reinforcements. Not a great call there. A few chapters after that, after Sasuke has his fight against the Raikage and everything, he arrives to the actual room where the summit was taking place, where Danzo was, and that's when Mifune attacks Sasuke. It's a pretty cool entrance Sasuke has there, by the way. He cuts the cloth of the symbols of the nations, and then he appears on the ceiling, upside down, staring down with his Sharingan at Danzo. But then something interesting happens. Sasuke gets attacked by a samurai, who just so happens to be the strongest samurai they have, Mifune. I mean, he introduces himself as a general to Gaara when Gaara arrives to the summit, and if he introduces himself as such, it implies there are other general samurais in the Land of Iron, but Mifune is definitely the strongest one, first because he is the one holding the 5 Kage Summit, and later on he becomes the battalion leader for the 5th Division in the Shinobi Alliance. You know, yeah, they probably just chose a samurai to make them feel included or whatever, but they had to choose the strongest one. And Mifune definitely feels like the quote-unquote Kage of the Land of Iron. So this guy attacks Sasuke, and because of the later fight he has in the series that we get to know more about him, that we're going to talk about later in this video, we also know that this guy is pretty damn fast for the Naruto universe. He is famous for his speed, and he attacks Sasuke, a tired Sasuke who had just fought against the Raikage, Gaara, Kankuro, Tebari, Darui, Shi, everybody there, and Sasuke casually blocks Mifune with his sword. Okay, it's a really cool shot, don't get me wrong, but this is the strongest samurai they have, and he can't do anything against Sasuke, and he's not even using anything special, just his Sharingan and his sword with some lightning. All Kage that faced Sasuke in that summit were pretty damn difficult challenges for him. Mifune was just like a casual block, and that's it. So if Sasuke's laying waste to platoons of samurai and the strongest samurai can't do anything against him, it begs the question, how on earth could the Land of Iron keep itself neutral and away from troubles in the Naruto world all this time? How are the other nations allowing that to happen? How are they not just steamrolling the Land of Iron? Because we know the samurai are definitely not as numerous as the shinobi are, especially the samurai in the Land of Iron, if you're not counting the weak samurai that we got introduced in the Land of Waves arc that got retconned. And by the way they're being portrayed in the 5 Kage Summit, we also know they're much weaker than strong ninjas. Like, yeah, they can enhance their blades with chakra and do some things with their chakra blades in there, but like, is that really stronger than a mid-Chunin, for example? Like, if Light Village sends Kakashi and Guy to invade the Land of Iron, they could probably take it on. All the samurai at the same time, they could probably do it. In the war arc, there's an entire army of samurai fighting against Kimimaro with the help of KCM1 Naruto, a shadow clone, but still KCM1 Naruto, and they don't seal Kimimaro. Kimimaro is dispelled with Itachi's undoing of the Edo Tensei. So your average samurai is not very strong whatsoever. Mifune may be a little stronger because at least he doesn't get one shot by Sasuke. He doesn't do anything to Sasuke, but he doesn't die there. It's just weird that the samurai have this neutrality aspect to them, because all the small nations that surround the major villages and the major nations, they are allies to some of the major nations. They have to do so, otherwise they're gonna be steamrolled and destroyed. The samurai, however, they're just neutral. It's, they're just that powerful, I suppose. Well, we do see there was conflict with the samurai in the Hanzo/Mifune flashback, so I guess they were challenged a few times before, but we don't even know what that conflict was even about when Mifune and Hanzo fought in the past. They could even be somewhere that was not the Land of Iron because it wasn't even snowing in the flashback, meaning, yeah, they were probably somewhere else. I mean, we don't know if it snows all year in the Land of Iron, but Hanzo was shirtless in the fight against Mifune in the flashback, so I have to assume it wasn't too cold. I don't know. Regardless, they were powerful enough to be introduced into the Ninja Alliance. I mean, Mifune is the one who says, yeah, Inoki, we're fighting alongside the ninjas. And Inoki smiles at him as if this is great help. It's not. Spoilers, because they pretty much do nothing during the entire war. The samurai would probably have been good to fight against White Zetsus, who are the fodder of the enemy side. But they fight against Edo Tenseis, which does not suit their abilities very much. Mifune has his 1v1 against Hanzo. It's an okay fight. What irks me about that fight is that we're watching two characters we pretty much care nothing about fighting, and we are not watching other characters we care so much more about doing anything. We get an entire flashback for Mifune, a character that got introduced very late in the Naruto series, and a character we pretty much don't care about because he doesn't have any screen time, he doesn't have an incredible presence on screen, and yeah, it's kind of a nice flashback. It flashes out his character much more than nothing at all, but I wanted to see characters I actually care about doing things in the war arc that we get to see pretty much nothing, like Shino or Rock Lee, or even Neji, who's going to die, and we don't see him doing anything except getting bodied by a White Zetsu. In this fight, we find out a few things about the samurai and Mifune, their great leader. The first thing we learn is that they use that mask to filter gas so they can fight against ninjas that use poison, which is a fair tactic, and it works well against Hanzo because he's a main poison user. And you could say that, yeah, this is one of the things the samurai do to combat the ninjas and stay neutral, but the thing is, not every ninja uses poison. Actually, it's a vast minority that does so. I guess they were lucky to encounter the only Edo Tensei that was using poison there in the war arc, right guys? So Mifune and Hanzo have their fight, and we also see their flashback fight. The core theme here is that Hanzo has lost his way. He was also a man who used to look for peace, like the samurai do, but at the end of his life, he just kind of lost track of that and was completely consumed by other, less noble goals and eventually killed by pain. Mifune has not forgotten his convictions, and so the fight in the present in the war arc is about Hanzo fighting his convictions back. Like, it's not a bad fight, as I said before, I just don't care about the characters. Even Hanzo, who is a legendary ninja who gave the Sanin their nickname, is not a character they deeply care about. I mean, if he fought against Tsunade, I guess the fight could have been a little bit more emotional because we care more about Tsunade and they actually have a relationship that it was pre-established. It doesn't have to get established during the fight itself with a flashback. But anyway, we get to see how Mifune actually fights against ninja, and he seems pretty practiced at that. According to Hanzo, and we see Mifune doing so, Mifune is so fast that he doesn't let ninjas weave hand signs to use ninjutsu. Which, yeah, definitely a good tactic if you're fighting a ninja. I mean, if the ninja has to use hand signs, because half the jutsus in Naruto Shippuden don't require hand signs anyway, so Mifune would be completely screwed. And it's in this fight that we find out that the samurai serve peace. Hanzo says the world has no place for the samurai anymore, which is interesting because the samurai, rising as this more peaceful faction that will fight to maintain peace, are surrounded by these shinobi nations that are always trying to take advantage of each other through combats and other means. And then Hanzo says something interesting too here. He says that many samurai have turned into shinobi. And I guess you could interpret this two ways. Number one, they actually become ninjas, training and acquiring ninjutsu and the ninja arts. Or two, they have become shinobis in their heart because they've given up on the ideals of peace that the samurai hold and now are looking for money, fame, and war and everything the shinobi world likes, quote unquote. It definitely feels like it's the latter when Hanzo says that, but it could be both. I could see some samurai defecting the Land of Iron and turning to villages to learn ninjutsu and everything. Maybe not the major villages, but some smaller ones like the Grass Village or the Hot Spring Village or the Waterfall Village. And this could be the fate of Zori and Miraji as well. It's just that they didn't take any shinobi training. They just left the Land of Iron. And when we see the flashback of Mifune fighting against Hanzo, when Hanzo still had conviction and was the powerful legendary shinobi that was feared among all nations, and even the Sanin couldn't do anything to defeat the guy, he made an entire platoon of samurai run away just because of his sheer presence in the battlefield, because they saw who they were about to fight. Mifune was the only one who stood behind to protect his friends and allies, and he lost to Hanzo in the flashback, and Hanzo let him live because he liked Mifune's conviction. And in the present, in the work, it's Mifune's conviction that allows him to defeat Hanzo. He cuts through Danzo and his scythe in a very cool 2-page spread, actually. And upon seeing that and realizing what he has lost, his conviction of peace, Hanzo commits seppuku, breaking the Edo Tensei bond. Kabuto actually tries to control him, but he doesn't allow it, and he is just sealed away. And that's interesting because it implies Hanzo attacked the Land of Iron when wars were happening, I suppose. We don't know exactly which one because those guys are old. It could have been the second or the third Great Ninja War, but at least one nation, the Land of Rain, broke that non-aggression agreement that every single shinobi nation had toward the Land of Iron and the samurai, because yeah, Hanzo was attacking them unless the samurai were protecting someone else, like I said before. In the war, they also, as I said before, fight against Edo Kimimaro and don't do anything against him. I mean, we do see their blades doing some damage to Kimimaro's bones. They're not cleaving through Kimimaro's bones, but they're denting them essentially, which is something. And after that, they show up to fight against the Ten Tails when the entire alliance converges on Naruto in chapter 611, but that's pretty much it. They don't do anything else, even after they show up to the battlefield there. Like, I don't remember seeing a single samurai after that point of the story. I'm pretty sure they appear here and there, like Mifune especially, but they're very unremarkable in the entire war. There's that one fight between Mifune and Hanzo, and that's it. And it's not even a long fight, it's a chapter and a half essentially. The major problem is that Kishimoto introduces this faction of warriors, or should I say reintroduces them, as credible threats, as powerful foes or allies for you to have, and he doesn't do anything with them except for the one Mifune fight we get. Which, don't get me wrong, I would pick the Mifune fight over the Ginkaku fight any day of the week. But when it comes to the characters, I would much rather see some other characters getting development. And if you're trying to do something with a samurai, they should be more relevant from the beginning of their introduction. You should show them as a little bit bit more capable and nothing at all when Sasuke is fighting against them. You should also come up with more interesting powers for them to use than just enhancing their swords with chakra. And it's just a strange idea for you to introduce a completely new faction of warriors in the Naruto series for you to not do anything with them, essentially. Yeah, they host the 5 Kage Summit, whatever. They do a couple of things in the work, but they are glorified extras. I mean, most of them are literally extras. Mifune is the only one with relevance. We do get a couple of other names in the 5 Kage Summit for other samurai that Mifune orders around, but Mifune is the only one we actually remember. Adding the samurai midway through the 5 Kage Summit just makes the series more bloated for no reason. It adds this additional element that you're saying, okay, I guess this is gonna have something to do with the story, right? And you're expecting something to come from it, but nothing comes out of it. So you're one, disappointed that the setup wasn't really paid off, and second, you just feel like other things could be done with the time they have on screen. Like, I guess you could say the Mifune fight was some payoff for the introduction of the samurai faction, but that's one dude. There are how many samurai? 1,000, maybe 2,000, maybe even more in the Shinobi Alliance, and Mifune is the only one we actually know anything about. And it's also weird for you to introduce this new, completely different warrior faction in the Naruto series that carries the name of samurai, and they're not gonna be nearly as relevant as the ninjas are. Okay, obviously, ninjas, Naruto, that's a series about ninjas, but the expectation you put on the word samurai, especially when you introduce them the way you did, it makes the reader feel like they are much more relevant than they ended up being. You have one character that gets any relevance, which is Mifune becoming the battalion leader of the 5th Division and also fighting against Hanzo. And Mifune is a fine character, as I said, the fight's okay, but you don't have to introduce a completely new warrior faction just to put that one character in. A much simpler solution that wouldn't bloat the story with another faction would be to just make the Land of Iron a new ninja village. It could be the village hidden in the snow. It makes complete sense, right? And in that village, there's just more traditionalists. They like to wear armor, they like to use swords, like back in the Warring States period when ninjas were wearing heavier armor and everything. And you could make Mifune the leader of that village. Obviously not a Kage because he's not from one of the 5 major nations, but the leader, and they're also neutral. And that's where they're going to host the 5 Kage Summit, and you could make some cool powers for them, I don't know. You can keep them with the exact same aesthetic, with the swords and everything. You can even use the chakra enhancing jutsu. But if they were to be the snow village, you could also give them, for example, ice Kage Genkai. Haku had that. He was from the Mist village, but he was the only one we'd have ever seen using ice Kage Genkai, and ice is a pretty cool thing. It surprises me that Naruto has so few ice users, because it's one of those shonen powers you would just expect a lot of people to be using if you have a power system based off the 4 elements, or 5 in Naruto's case. The samurai introduction just feels weird in the Naruto series, but it doesn't ruin anything. You could even keep the Mifune fight in the story, but just add more stuff from the other characters for me to be satisfied. It's just that the Mifune fight feels like it's filler in the manga. There are a lot of filler fights in the first day of the war arc in the anime, and some of them have interesting concepts, like Edo Hayate versus Yugao, Edo Torune versus Shino. Well, that one was in the second day, but anyways. Those fights have very interesting concepts, and they could have been very cool to see if they were not undercooked fights in the anime, but they don't further the overall plot of the war arc, and therefore they're not completely necessary for you to see, and that's why the anime just kind of makes them as a side fight, when the anime was essentially destroying viewers with a billion fillers during the war arc. And oddly enough, the Mifune versus Hanzo fight feels like one of those fights. Oh, it's a filler fight, it's a cool one. Cool characters with an interesting relationship having a fight here, but that one is actually in the manga. Like this video if you haven't done so already, please subscribe and ring notifications. Those things are extremely helpful and they take 5 seconds, so please do them. Watch this other video right here for more cool Naruto content, and thank you so much for watching.